What do you think of when you think of ad-libs? Woo! Jeez! Skirt, skirt. Think of stuff like that, right? You think about the sauce that gets added to the track. That's how I look at the ad-libs. They're that flavor, that spice, that extra bit of swagger that we want to inject onto a track. But a whole key to that is making sure that you can clearly hear them and that they're sitting right in the mix. Now, for me, when it comes to mixing ad-libs, I focus on 5 strategies, amongst others, of course, but there's 5 of them that I want to share with you today in this video. If you don't know who I am, my name's 5 Piece. I'm a producer and engineer based in Toronto, and I help music creators like you sound better and get paid for their music. So if you get value out of videos like this one, definitely subscribe to my channel so you can see more. And if you want to kick it up a notch, I just launched a Patreon where you can now access some of my videos early and get all kinds of early exclusives, bonuses, and other things that'll be very helpful for you if you want to get better at your craft. Now, with that being said, let's talk about how I approach mixing ad-libs. And to do that, I'm going to be using my friend Everything Oshan's latest single, A La Becque. The first thing you want to do with ad-libs is you want to edit or gate the noise away. I find, in my experience, a lot of artists are providing vocals that are simply too noisy. And this song actually is a perfect example of that. If I go in and look at these ad-libs in particular, you can see I've already done some editing, but if I were to extend some of these specific phrases, you're going to see that there's some noise, right, between the performance. You can see it's probably headphone bleed, maybe it's background noise, but whatever it is, you of course want to go in and ideally manually get rid of this noise. You want to go in and delete it, so that way it's not bleeding through anymore, and not only that, it's not going to interfere with the main vocal. Essentially, if you have this noise underneath the performance, well, you're just clogging up things, creating congestion. It's unnecessary information, so let's just get rid of it altogether, and it's going to make things sound super clean and super tight. Now, of course, you might be lazy. I'm also lazy sometimes, and that's why I mention the gate. I like to use a gate as well, but a gate can be followable. What I mean by that is sometimes the noise will be just loud enough to pass your gate threshold and still squeeze through. However, this can make your life a little bit easier, a little bit more automatic. In fact, you may want to start by putting on a gate first and triggering it so that way all the noise gets reduced or muted and only the loud stuff, the ad-lib itself, gets through. But then if there's anything else that still is able to squeeze through and you can't manipulate the parameters to mute it, then of course you'll go in and then do that manual editing stuff that I mentioned. I find that manual editing is always the best approach because it gives you the most amount of control. You know that something is gone, it's muted or deleted, and it's not going to be there. Whereas with the gate, every now and then something could sneak by without you noticing. With that being said, if you want to learn how to use a gate to do this exact thing, watch my video how to use a gate on vocals. I'll leave it in the description below. Now, with editing and gating out of the way, we could talk about how to get your ad-libs to sit in the mix. And really, we're going to be talking about volume and how to manage that volume over 4 distinctly different stages. And the reason why is because vocals are dynamic in volume. If we just look at this moment here, you can clearly see that there are moments of the vocal performance for the ad-lib that are louder than others, right? There's a variance in volume all the time. Vocals in general are just dynamic in nature, and we want to make sure that the listener can clearly experience them without something being either too overwhelming or the opposite, where it's too underwhelming and hard to hear. To do this, we're going to work through 4 stages. Let's start with static levels first. I'm going to bypass all of the plugins here, and I'm also going to turn off any automation I have for now. And what we want to do here is let's focus on this specific section. All you're going to do is literally set your volume fader, okay? This is the static level, so this is just the general level for the overall track. It's very understandable that some things are going to be maybe too quiet at times and other things are going to be too loud, but we want to just get a general ballpark level of where the ad-lib in this case should be sitting, and then we can make our additional moves from there. Your goal, your main goal is really just to get it to a place where you like it, and of course a place where it is not clipping and creating harshness, distortion, or any of the negative stuff that we don't want. This is stuff that I've talked about in my setting vocal levels video in the past. That being said, let's focus on this section, and I'm actually going to just reset my level. I'm going to loop this around a couple of times, and we're going to actually play and set this level to where I like it.
I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waist hand. Real, I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waist hand. Real, I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waist hand. Real, I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waist hand. Real, I take the money from the
We have our static level here. It's pretty good. And of course, you want to reference across your whole track to make sure it's sitting well. From there, I'm going to actually want to do some compression. Now, I use the R comp in this particular case, but really you want to just use the compressor to even out the difference in volume between these ad-libs, okay? So maybe I can do this without having to do some manual automation or clip gain, which are the next steps, of course. But I could use this compressor to essentially turn up this quieter one and turn down this louder one and get them to be a little bit more uniform in volume. That's the general general purpose of using a compressor. And if you want to learn more specifically about how to use a compressor and its settings, definitely check out my other video, how to compress vocals. The way I like to set this up is I like to have a 2-to-1 ratio, a medium to a slow attack, a faster release. I'm going to put my manual setting on here so that way it actually looks at the release setting. And then I'm going to dial my threshold in to get a little bit of gain reduction, perhaps on both, but especially on the second louder ad-lib here. And what's going to happen is I'm going to look for a 1 to 2, maybe 3 dB of gain reduction, and then based on that, I can add some makeup gain. So the logic here is it's going to turn down the louder one, it's going to add a little bit of volume to make up for what it's losing, and then the quieter one may not necessarily trigger it as much, so it might not lose any volume, but it's still going to benefit from that makeup gain, and therefore the two of these should, in theory, be a little bit closer in volume. So let's do this exactly the same way. I'm going to play this loop.
I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real. I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real.
They're still not perfectly even, and that's of course where we have these next steps coming up, but at least you could tell here that using the compressor is going to bridge the gap in volume between the louder stuff and the quieter stuff and get them to sit a little bit more in uniform with one another. Now that leads us to the next step, which is clip gain. Now I like to do this after because honestly, the compressor could do a lot of that heavy lifting, a lot of that work, and it'll save us that manual time. As you can kind of tell, sometimes I'm lazy. I don't want to go in and do all these things. That being said, as you can tell, this ad-lib is still a little bit louder than the one before. And what I would do is I would actually go in and manually turn the audio clip gain down on this specific track, okay? Or at least on this specific ad-lib. And maybe do the opposite. Maybe turn this one up by a little bit. So I've turned this up by 1, I've turned this down by 2. Let's now see if they're sitting a little bit better. And of course I did this without listening, but we'll check right now.
I need the money in the waistband. 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 I need the money in.
That sounds pretty good. Let me back it up and hear it in context.
White man, I take the money from the way hand. I need the money in the waistband. Real.
Definitely sitting a little bit closer in volume, and I like that, right? And you can tell I'm doing this manually by grabbing the clip itself, cropping that clip, and then just editing the volume directly on it. The final step of getting vocals to sit is to use automation, use volume automation. And on this track, all vocal chain stuff aside, I've already done some of that, all right? So you can see here that I've actually automated the volume for the beginning of the track here to be louder on the ad-lib side of things than later on. And this is because the arrangement of your track is constantly going to change. You might have more things clashing or working against the ad-libs, and then at other times the opposite, right? Maybe the ad-libs are too loud and too dominant, and you're going to want to balance this, right? So section by section, go in and really use your automation, your volume automation here to just get those ad-libs to sit in the right pocket. If you need them to come out and be a little bit more forward at times, such as I needed them to on this intro, you're going to automate them up so they're louder, and then later on in other sections, in my case for the rest of the song here, I've really automated it so it is down. But either way, we're going to use this automation, this volume automation, as the sort of final step to make sure that it's perfectly level, that it's clear, that we're hearing it, and that it's sitting exactly where we need to sit it. Of course, after working through those previous 3 volume controls that I just mentioned. Now, as a bonus tip, I would recommend using multi-band sidechain compression or just sidechain compression in general to allow your main vocal, your lead vocal, to dominate over the ad-libs. Sometimes what happens is the ad-libs will come up and they'll start to overtake the lead, right? They might just pop out too much, or it might just be a little bit too congested. It's not clear that the lead should dominate over them. So we could use sidechain compression to fix this. So what you're going to do is on your ad-lib track, you're going to put a multi-band or just whatever sidechain compressor you want to use. And in the case of the multi-band, you're going to select your frequency spectrum that you want to affect. I usually like to focus on wherever the vocal, the main vocal itself lives, typically somewhere around, let's say 400 to let's say 5,000, maybe 10,000, really depends, but at least somewhere in this pocket for sure. I'm going to set my range to -3 so it's not affecting it as aggressively. I'm going to now set an input. I've already set up an input here where my main vocal is sending on this main Vox sidechain. And then I'm going to just select the external so that way it actually recognizes this input in the case of the Pro MB. Some of these may be extra steps you don't need to do depending on what you're using. So let me find a section where the vocals and the ad-libs are sort of happening simultaneously and where they might be rubbing into each other. So I want to just go in there, take a listen, and let's see if this multi-band is just clearing things up a little bit.
I'm chasing me down like one of them zombies. I do not fall for a type cause she naughty. I'm chasing me down like one of them zombies. I do not fall for a type cause she naughty. I'm chasing me down like one of them zombies. I do not fall for a type cause she naughty. I'm chasing me.
It's subtle, but that's intended. We don't want this to totally kill the ad-libs, but we obviously want to make sure that these ad-libs are just not overtaking the lead, especially when they're happening. You can tell that this one is sort of happening more where there's a break. This moment where there's a break and the other ad-libs that are happening when there's an opening, such as here, they're not really going to be affected as much, right? But it's of course the ones that are happening at the same time as the main. Those are the ones that are going to get reduced. But I do find that this just helps create a little bit more of a cleaner aesthetic, a cleaner sound, and less congestion, less muddiness in your mixes. Now, the third thing I want to focus on for ad-libs is you want to affect them uniquely. And again, there's going to be several ways that we could do this. Let's first start by talking about EQ because it's a very common one. Something that you often hear people talking about with EQ on ad-libs is applying a telephone effect. But if I take my EQ, I'm definitely going to want to filter out some lows and potentially some highs as well, okay? By filtering out the lows, we're going to thin out the vocal, the ad-lib. And by taking out the highs, we're actually going to do the opposite. We're going to darken it a little bit and make it sound a little less clear. The telephone does not usually have both of these there. You're not really getting all the frequency presence. You're getting a much thinner and less high-end sound typically through a receiver. So let's just actually solo the ad-libs and hear what that sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, volume-wise, they're still fairly consistent, but you could just see how the tone has sort of changed, right? So obviously filtering out some highs, filtering out some lows, getting rid of that stuff is going to definitely sculpt and create this sound. That's the first thing. The next thing you want to do is create some resonances by boosting, okay? Now you got to just sort of play around and sweep and see what works for that person's vocal, but let's just try right here.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You get the idea. Let's hear it in context now.
I take the money from the white hand. I need the money in the white sand. Real.
It's a little bit of a different aesthetic. And of course, as you do this, since you're getting rid of information, it might actually make your track sound quieter. So you may need to then compensate with the volume. You may need to add some volume in this case to better hear those moments. But EQ is definitely a very effective way to just create a unique sound or texture on your ad-libs, especially when you do stuff that's different from the main. My main is not being EQ'd like this, and that's why this helps make it stand out. But this isn't the only way to affect a vocal. In fact, there's several other ways. And one of my other ways that I like to do that is with saturation. I'm going to add a saturation knob here, just a standard free plugin that I've talked about in some of my other videos. You can now create a distorted sound, and this is really something that'll make you sound a little bit more like a Travis Scott or a Kanye West on 808s and Heartbreak. So let's actually just play this and do this.
I need the money in the white sand. Real. I need the money in the white sand. Real. I need the money in the white sand. Real.
It's clearly distorted, right, and saturated. And just to really show you, let me solo this.
Yeah.
And I did this really simply with this one knob interface, right? But of course you can see how adding maybe a saturation curve can really change the texture, the presence, and the sound. But similar to before, as you do this, you're going to now probably be increasing the volume or the amplitude, or at least the perceived loudness. And you're going to now need to reevaluate the actual volume of the track itself, probably turning it down. This is obviously a really good method for getting ad-libs to cut. And I actually have a video all about that topic using saturation. I'll leave that up above and in the description down below. Now, there are a few other methods that I'm going to quickly highlight. One of them is to apply a phaser, a flanger, or some other type of modulator to your ad-lib track. Now, similar to the others, this is a very situational thing that may or may not work, but we're going to try it out here. So I'm going to add just the standard stock air flanger here. And really, I just like to work with a preset and see what I can make happen. So let me actually highlight this area.
Yeah. 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 I need the money in the white sand. Real.
So obviously really quick, but adding this flanger usually makes things sound wider, a little bit less mono, a little bit more stereo, sometimes more robotic as well. Modulation in general is typically taking your original signal, duplicating that signal, affecting it, and then mixing it back with the original signal in different ways. Sometimes it's creating a time difference. Sometimes it's actually applying an effect. A flanger is obviously one of several kinds of effects that you could be using here, but this might definitely be a good thing for you to just expand the stereo image of your ad-lib in general and get it out of the way of the original main vocal. And for a final idea, we have pitch shifting. This is another great thing that you can utilize. Again, situational, but it's something that you can utilize to just create a really cool effect. I typically like to use something like Soundtoy's little Alter Boy. I find that to be really great. In fact, I have a very popular video about how I use this on some other songs. I'll plug that up above and down below right now as well if you want to check it out. But what I typically like to do is do a 12 semitone octave. So I'm going down a full 12 semitones, or the opposite, a full 12 up. And this will create two very large extremes. In fact, if I just keep this here and I've got the mix in 100%, you're going to hear that 12 semitones up is like a high-pitched chipmunk voice. Whereas low will be the opposite. It's going to be like a low demon kind of voice. Now that alone is probably not what you want. Okay, I want to layer this, in fact, underneath my dry vocal. So that's obviously where this mix knob comes into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play this and slowly invigorate it by adding a little bit of the mix, and maybe I'll keep it on the low. The low, I find, will usually make things sound thicker and richer, whereas the high will make it sound obviously a little bit more high-end, a little bit more comical, so to speak. It really depends on how you use it, I guess, but low is usually where I'm gravitating towards, but of course, use your judgment and your own taste. So let's do this. I'll take it out, put it in, and blend the dry wet.
I need the money in the wasteland. Real 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 I need the money in the wasteland.
I'm not personally liking it too much on this track, but it's definitely an idea that you can explore on some of yours, right? It's more about the intention, and you can hear how it really makes your track sound like a multi-voice thing. It's not just the single ad-lib, but now it's that ad-lib plus the deeper octave, times however many times you want to do this. You can actually do this twice. You could do it like this with the low, and then again with the high. A lot of different ways you can implement it into your track. The next tip is we want to utilize stereo positioning. First aspect of this is we never want to have our ad-libs pan to the center. The reason why is because our actual main vocal is in the center, and by having the ad-libs in the center, it's technically doing it a disservice. Now, of course, there are spaces here, so that's fine, but during moments where they're happening at the same time, they're really going to clash, and they're going to get in each other's way. The lead's probably going to drown out the ad-lib, or maybe vice versa, but by simply panning the ad-lib just even slightly, 5 to the left or 5 to the right, we're going to be able to create a lot more room for the ad-lib to be heard and felt and get out of the way of that main vocal. I recommend automating your panning, and that's what I do. Even though you might see at certain times, for example, it says 0, my ad-libs are pretty much never in the center. They're always panned, okay? And what I like to do is actually alternate my panning. So look here, you can see throughout the entire thing, every ad-lib for the most part, except maybe for a bit of the intro where the ad-lib is the only thing happening, but every other moment, they are basically being panned either to the left or to the right. And a lot of times they are alternating. So if you look here, see the end here, I'm going 15, right? A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Let's just check this out. Right? Hey, and it's moving to each side. And that sort of repeats itself throughout where I'm doing that exact same thing. Maybe not for the exact same ad-lib, but it's constantly altering. Check this one. Yeah. Each ad-lib was panned to its own unique location. A lot of times it's this call and response where the first one maybe goes to the left and then the next one goes to the right. And they just keep kind of going back and forth, somewhat like a ping pong in a way, but a little bit different. The logic here is we're just moving the ad-libs out of the way of the main vocal. We're going to give them their own space. It's going to make the ad-lib easier to hear. It's going to make everything sound less congested. And again, like the other things that I've talked about, if you do this, you might find that your ad-libs now become a little bit too pronounced, depending on the move or where you've placed it in the stereo field. So sometimes you do want to back up off that, right? Volume-wise, you want to go in, maybe turn it down if suddenly that panning is causing the ad-lib to pop out. But either way, this is definitely a great strategy and technique to make your ad-libs shine more. Now, the final tip I have is we want to add FX for flavor. And a lot of times I am using some contrast in my mixes. So what I mean by that is sometimes I'll have my ad-libs be heavily reverberated and then my main won't be so reverberated. It'll be a little bit more dry, right? Same goes for delay and other effects, right? In fact, if I apply a flanger to my ad-libs, I'm definitely not going to be doing that on my main, right? My main's going to be very much dead center, but then my ad-libs are going to be flanged and be a little bit wider in terms of appearance or perception. Now, for me, I'm commonly using my reverb and delay. That's what I'm typically going to on these ad-libs. And you can actually hear it even on this track, right? If we actually solo and listen.
Yeah.
And then if I were to take out those effects.
Yeah.
Right? Significantly drier in terms of perception, sound, feeling. Totally different vibe. And of course, when I'm playing it soloed, it's much more noticeable and jarring. But still, we want to usually add some sort of ambience, especially on these ad-libs. Just give them a little bit more space. Let them breathe a little bit more. The other benefit of adding a reverb is it actually pushes your track, whatever you're affecting, more into the background. It makes it feel less upfront. And I find that's what you want with ad-libs. I mean, obviously you have those Migos style ad-libs that are just right in your face. Sometimes you don't want that, right? Sometimes you want them to be a little bit more background. You still want them to be heard and felt, of course, but you just don't want them to be so dominant. And a reverb is a great way to just push these things more into the background. And then by keeping your main more dry, that'll be more front and center and in the foreground, of course, the thing that you focus on. Now, the problem with reverb, though, is that it can be messy. And for that reason, sometimes it makes sense to not necessarily use a reverb, but instead use a delay. I like to use a short delay sometimes for this effect. Just so you know, a short delay is typically about an eighth note pattern for me. It depends on your BPM, of course, but 1/8 of a pattern should be sufficient. And the cool thing is it's able to almost give you this reverb-like appearance or aesthetic, but without that messy stuff, without pushing it into the background, without creating mudding congestion. The delay will give you the same type of effect, but all the benefits, right? Give you the feeling without the congestion and mud. So let's actually try that right here. I'm going to solo the ad-libs for a moment, and I'll also just mute the reverb that I have here. And let's strictly use the delay and see what we can make happen.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You know, you're kind of getting it. Definitely sounds like a delay. It's a pattern. It's a repeat. That's what these delays are for. They're emphasizing specific patterns that match the BPM, of course. But in context, that actually might sound a little bit more like a reverb. Let's check it out.
Take the money from the white hand. I need the money in the white sand. Real.
Now, in addition to the short delays, I also like to use medium delays. I can use my medium delay to do a delay throw where I'm then emphasizing a specific part, right? Where it's just echoing or repeating a specific line that maybe isn't repeated. So maybe at the end of the verse, for example, we can have a delay happen here, an elongated delay that's a quarter note pattern, and that'll just add a little bit more sauce with that repeat. Let's just try it out here, for example.
And make it fit like it's Tetris. I get the money in a lot big. I get the...
Just to solo it so you can really hear it. Right, you can hear that lingering repeat or delay happening with the medium delay here. And again, I find that you need to make sure you have the space for that. But overall, playing with these different delays and reverbs on your ad-libs will definitely make a huge difference. And these are just a few of the ways that I like to implement them into my own tracks. So true to my name, this was a 5-piece for ad-libs, right? I went through 5 strategies here, 5 things that I like to focus on that I think are important when it comes to mixing ad-libs. And I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please tap that like button until it turns blue because it means so much to me. It would help this video do better in the long run. And it'll help the YouTube algorithm, though, to show you some more of my helpful content. And if you want to see more of that content, definitely tap subscribe as well. Hit the bell so you can get notified every time I drop a new video. And I'm excited to continue helping you guys in a future one. All right? See y'all soon. Peace.
5.